The glass door hissed shut as Victoria slid a folder toward Ethan and smiled without warmth. The corner office smelled faintly of espresso and lemon polish, and the late sun cut across the black marble floor in thin gold bars that stopped just short of Ethan's worn brown shoes. He stayed standing. His badge still hung from a navy lanyard against his pale blue shirt, slightly frayed at the edge where little fingers had tugged it during rushed mornings at home. On the wall behind Victoria, the company's top quarterly awards gleamed in brushed steel. 3 of the metrics in that framed report existed because Ethan had spent 6 straight weekends rebuilding a collapsing fulfillment model nobody else had wanted to touch. Victoria tapped the folder once with a manicured nail. "You've done solid work." She paused, eyes moving over him the way someone might inspect a tool before putting it back in a drawer. "Very solid." Ethan waited. Down below, through 40 floors of glass, a siren dopplered between towers and faded into the city hum. He had come upstairs with spreadsheet dust still in his cuffs and the thin ache of too much fluorescent light behind his eyes. But there had been something else too, something steadier. Hope, maybe. Not the loud kind. Just the quiet kind a single father carried when school tuition was due in 12 days, and he had still chosen to stay late enough to save a division that was bleeding money. Victoria leaned back in her chair, leather creaking softly. "Starting Monday, you'll report to Daniel." Ethan did not blink. A heating vent whispered above them. Somewhere in the hall, heels clicked and passed. "Daniel?" he asked. Victoria gave a small nod, as if clarifying a seating chart. "My nephew. We're positioning him for leadership. He needs someone competent under him while he learns the business." The words landed cleanly, almost gently, which made them colder. Ethan looked at the folder. Daniel's name sat on the cover sheet in bold type above a title Ethan had earned in everything but label. The promotion package had already been rewritten. His recommendations, his turnaround notes, his staffing plan, there in the annex, absorbed into a structure that placed him underneath a man who had once mistaken gross margin for net revenue in front of an entire client team and laughed it off because someone else always cleaned up after him. Victoria folded her hands. "This is good for everyone. You'll have stability. He'll have support. And the division stays in the family." Ethan finally sat, not because she had invited him to, but because he wanted the chair between them to stop feeling like a courtroom witness stand. The fabric was cool through his shirt. "The division stays in the company," he said quietly. "That's what I worked for." Victoria's smile thinned. "Let's not make this emotional." On the edge of her desk sat the crystal block from last year's leadership summit, catching light and breaking it into hard little shards across the wood. Ethan thought of the overnight calls, the vendor renegotiations, the way he had patched shipping losses with a routing model built after his daughter had fallen asleep at the kitchen table beside him. He thought of Daniel arriving late, joking loudly, leaving early. He thought of respect being spoken about in this building as if it were a perk instead of a baseline. Victoria opened the folder and slid a pen beside it. "Sign the updated reporting acknowledgement. HR can handle the title adjustment by 5. Ethan's hand did not move toward the pen. He looked at the page, then at Victoria, and in the stillness between them the room seemed to sharpen around one simple question. How much humiliation did she believe a man would swallow if she assumed he had nowhere else to go? Ethan looked at the pen for one more beat, then reached not for the form, but for the badge at his chest. The plastic edge clicked softly against the desk as he set it down beside Victoria's crystal block, and the sound was so small it seemed to irritate the entire room. Victoria's chin lifted. "Don't be reckless." Ethan's fingers straightened the lanyard once, almost neatly, while the air conditioning hummed across the back of his hands. "Reckless would be teaching your nephew on my back," he said. "I won't do it." She sat forward. The soft leather under her elbows sighed, and the city light on her desk turned sharper as a cloud moved off the glass tower opposite them. "You have a daughter," she said, voice low and precise. "You need this job." Ethan met her eyes, and for the first time since walking in, he let the silence sit long enough to answer for him. Then he pushed his chair back. The casters rolled over the rug with a dull drag. "She needs a father who doesn't let people rent his dignity by the paycheck." Victoria rose too quickly, the heel of one pump striking marble. "If you walk out now, there won't be another offer." Ethan picked up nothing. No folder. No severance packet. No last appeal to fairness. He only smoothed the cuff of his shirt and turned for the door. At the threshold, he paused when Victoria spoke again, this time without polish. "You are making a mistake over pride." Ethan glanced back at the skyline reflected in her office glass, his own outline faint and steady beside hers. "No," he said. "I'm refusing yours." The door whispered shut behind him. Outside, the executive corridor smelled of carpet glue and cold coffee. A junior assistant looked up from a tablet, saw Ethan empty-handed, and quickly looked back down. By the time he reached the elevator bank, his phone buzzed with 3 messages from payroll, HR, and building access in that exact order, neat as a firing squad, and just as impersonal. He pressed the down button. Stainless steel doors opened with a clean chime, and in the mirrored panel he caught his own face at last. Tired eyes, jaw set, the faint crease left by his lanyard now gone from his collar. In the lobby, the revolving doors pushed warm street air against his skin. Traffic splashed sound off the granite facade. A food cart on the corner sent up the smell of onions and hot oil, and for a second the ordinary life of the city felt almost indecently unchanged. Ethan stood under the awning and called home. Lily answered on the 3rd ring with the bright clatter of dishes in the background. "Did they finally make you the boss?" she asked. Ethan closed his eyes once and listened to her moving around their small apartment. Cabinet door thumping, television murmuring somewhere far back. "Not exactly," he said, "but he'd be home early." There was a pause, then the rustle of her lowering her voice into the practical tone children of single parents learn too soon. "Is that bad?" A bus exhaled at the curb, brakes squealing. Ethan watched his reflection tremble in a rain-stained storefront window. "It's different," he said. "We'll talk when I get there." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and started walking, not toward the train at first, but away from the tower, as if his body needed proof that he had really left it. 40 floors above, Victoria remained by the desk where his badge still lay. She did not call him back down. Instead, she hit one internal extension. "Send Daniel up," she said. Her voice had cooled again. "Effective immediately. He's taking over the division." That decision moved faster than rumor. By the time Ethan reached the corner, access to the systems he had built was being handed to the one man least able to read the warnings inside them. By 8:12 the next morning, Ethan's old dashboard was blinking red and 3 departments Daniel did not know talk to each other. In the operations bullpen, the fluorescent panels cast a flat white glare over rows of half-empty desks, and the burnt smell of reheated coffee clung to the air vents. A supply chain analyst named Mara stood beside the wall monitor with her arms crossed so tightly the sleeve seams whitened. "That reorder flag isn't noise," she said. Daniel loosened his tie and laughed under his breath like a man swatting at weather. "Everything here is overbuilt. That's why we needed fresh leadership." He tapped the touchscreen with 2 impatient fingers and disabled the exception alerts Ethan had installed after the spring vendor collapse. 3 boxes vanished from the dashboard. The room went too quiet. "There," Daniel said. "Cleaner already." On another floor, customer service began absorbing calls from stores whose shipments had split across the wrong regions overnight. In procurement, a buyer stared at an email chain Ethan had once annotated line by line. Each note a safeguard. Each safeguard now ignored because Daniel wanted speed by noon and optics by 3. The copier near the glass corridor jammed and beeped uselessly. Someone cursed softly. Someone else refreshed a spreadsheet that would not reconcile. Daniel stepped into the conference room at 10 with 2 vice presidents on speaker and announced a revised rollout schedule for the company's biggest home goods client, Westmere Retail, moving delivery windows up by 48 hours to show confidence. A few chairs creaked. Mara spoke first. "The warehouses can't absorb that shift without the stagger file Ethan built." Daniel waved a hand. "Then improvise." The speaker crackled. A VP asked whether warehouse labor had approved the change. Daniel answered before anyone else could. "Handled." It was not. By lunchtime, forklifts in 2 states were waiting on labels generated from outdated routing logic, and a stack of pallets sat under sodium lights in a Texas dock while heat pressed against the bay doors like a fist. Back at headquarters, Daniel ordered a client-facing memo blaming temporary software inconsistencies. He never noticed that the software was only inconsistent because he had severed the exact alerts that translated risk into action. At 2:37 p.m., Westmere's chief operating officer called Victoria directly. The line had the clipped static of speakerphone and the cold civility of someone already considering legal language. Your team promised execution, he said. What we're seeing is confusion, missed windows, and no accountable lead. Victoria stood behind her desk, one hand braced on the polished wood, while Daniel sat across from her, trying not to look at the tablet in his lap. We've had a transition, Victoria said. The answer made the client quieter, not calmer. Then your transition just cost us floor planning in 186 stores. When the call ended, the office seemed to hold its breath around the faint hum of the air purifier in the corner. Victoria turned to Daniel. Why was I not told the system changes would affect Westmere? Daniel swallowed and pushed the tablet toward her. These controls were unnecessary. Ethan buried everything under layers. No one could move. Victoria looked at the red status blocks multiplying across the live board. Red in shipping, red in service levels, red in margin protection. The division Ethan had held upright with invisible discipline was showing its ribs after less than a day without him. She did not say his name right away. That was the most revealing part. Instead, she told Daniel to get every director on a 5 p.m. emergency call and produce a recovery plan before then. He nodded too fast and left with the paper-dry look of a man walking into deep water without admitting he could not swim. At 4:51, another notice hit her inbox. 2 senior managers from the division had requested confidential meetings with HR. The trouble was no longer theoretical. It had started to spread. Fluorescent light hummed over the glass conference room, and the burnt smell of overworked coffee drifted in from the executive pantry, while a wall of dashboards bled red across 3 mounted screens. At 5 p.m. sharp, chairs scraped, speakerphones clicked live, and Daniel Hale walked in with his tie loosened half an inch, carrying a recovery deck that looked polished from a distance and hollow up close. Victoria sat at the head of the table without opening her notebook. Her thumb rested on the corner of Ethan Mercer's old process memo, the paper already softened from being handled too much in one day. We just need alignment, Daniel said, too quickly, tapping the remote as a slide titled Immediate Stabilization appeared. The issues are isolated. We're consolidating approvals, reducing noise, and streamlining the reorder logic. Mara Benson, 2 seats from the end, looked up from her laptop. The screen glow sharpened the tired lines under her eyes. You disabled the reorder alerts, she said. Those weren't noise. Daniel gave a short laugh that landed flat in the chilled room. Those flags were triggering unnecessary escalations. Westmere lost inventory visibility in 186 stores, Mara replied. That wasn't an escalation. That was a warning you turned off. A director from fulfillment cleared his throat, the sound dry as paper. Another from client success slid a printout across the table, its edges still warm from the copier. 2 more regional accounts reported mismatched shipments in the last hour, he said. If those notices had routed the old way, someone could have stopped them by lunch. Daniel clicked to the next slide. His hand missed the button once. That's exactly why we're simplifying authority, he said. Too many people were touching the system. Victoria finally looked up. The quiet in the room changed shape. Who understood the system best before this morning? She asked. Daniel paused. Outside the glass wall, evening traffic flashed red and white in the rain-dark street below. The structure was overbuilt, he said, avoiding the question. No, Victoria said, her voice even. Who understood it? No one moved for a beat. Then Mara answered without dressing it up. Ethan did. That name settled over the table harder than any accusation. Daniel straightened, pushing both palms against the conference table's lacquered edge. He made it impossible to manage without him, he said. That's not leadership. That's dependency. Mara turned her laptop and rotated it toward Victoria. A sequence of audit logs filled the screen in pale rows of timestamps and user IDs. These were his safeguards, she said. These changes were made after he left. By Daniel. The room made that small, involuntary corporate sound. Someone exhaling, someone shifting, one pen stopping mid-note. Daniel reached for the old defense again. We needed speed. You removed control, said the fulfillment director. Those are not the same thing. The call with the regional leads began to fracture in real time. One voice after another joined through the speaker, clipped by static and impatience. A warehouse in Ohio had pallets sitting without release codes. A vendor in Phoenix was holding shipments after duplicate instructions. A planning manager in St. Louis said 3 team leads were asking whether they should start taking calls from recruiters. Victoria said nothing for several seconds. The air conditioning whispered overhead. Rain ticked against the glass. Then she turned to Daniel and said, "Undo every change you made today." He blinked. "That could create more instability. Leaving them in place already has." Her words were clean and cold. "And if you can't reverse them, say that now." Daniel looked around the table as if someone might step in and rescue the sentence for him. No one did. His mouth opened, then shut. On the far screen, another alert appeared from client relations. Westmere requesting executive review by 8 a.m. Victoria saw it at the same moment the others did. She rose, gathered the softened memo, and gave Daniel the first deadline that sounded less like management and more like judgment. "You have until 7:30 tomorrow morning to show me a working plan," she said. "If you don't have one, I will find someone who does." Steam lifted from a pot of boxed mac and cheese in a small apartment kitchen, fogging the lower half of the window, while city sirens passed faint and far below. A child's pencil scratched over homework paper at the counter, and the old refrigerator gave its usual shuddering click just before settling back into a steady buzz. Ethan Mercer stood at the stove in rolled shirt sleeves, stirring with one hand and checking the time on the microwave clock with the other. Lily sat on a stool in mismatched socks, chewing the eraser on a pencil while a worksheet about state capitals lay crooked beneath her elbow. "You're home before dark twice in 1 week," she said without looking up. "That means something weird happened." A small smile touched the corner of his mouth, there and gone. That's one way to put it. He poured the pasta into 2 bowls, set one in front of her, then took the seat across from her with the caution of a man who had spent all day holding his spine straight. The apartment smelled like butter powder, dish soap, and the rain that had followed him in on his jacket. Lily watched him over the rim of her spoon. "Are you in trouble?" He tore open a packet of black pepper. "Not the kind that belongs to me." She accepted that answer the way children sometimes accept the edges of truths they know will widen later. Halfway through dinner, his phone vibrated against the laminate table, skidding an inch through a ring of condensation. The name on the screen was Victor Shaw. Ethan let it buzz once before answering. "Victor." On the other end came the low, steady voice of a man who did not waste words. "I heard you're no longer at Hale Logistics." Ethan leaned back, eyes on the rain beads racing down the dark pane. "News moves fast. Competence leaves a vacuum," Victor said. "People notice." Lily gathered her bowl and carried it to the sink, the faucet squeaking when she turned it on. Ethan stepped into the narrow hallway for privacy, though the apartment barely offered any. "If this is sympathy, save it," he said quietly. "It isn't," Victor replied. "It's business. Ridgeline Distribution is opening a new operations integration group in Chicago. We need someone who can build systems, not just babysit them. I've got budget authority. You'd report to me, not under someone's nephew. Full benefits. Remote flexibility 3 days a week. Bring me an answer by tomorrow afternoon before my board meeting." Ethan rubbed the bridge of his nose. In the living room, a floor lamp cast amber light over Lily's backpack, one sneaker tipped on its side like it had given up mid-step. "You're offering fast," he said. "I'm offering before someone else with sense does," Victor answered. "And because I know exactly who kept that division standing over there." Silence sat between them for a moment, not awkward, just waited. Ethan looked toward the kitchen. Lily had dried her hands and was pretending not to listen, which meant she was listening to every breath. "Send the details," he said. "I'll read them tonight." "Already in your inbox." The line clicked dead. Ethan returned to the table, and Lily traced the grain of the laminate with one finger. "That sounded better than weird," she said. He checked his email. "Salary. Signing bonus. Health coverage. School relocation support if needed." No condescension buried between the lines, no poison ladder dressed as opportunity. "It might be," he said. "Would we have to move?" she asked. The question landed softly, but it changed the room. Rain ticked against the glass. Somewhere upstairs, a television laughed too loudly through the ceiling. Ethan set the phone down and met her eyes. "Only if it made life better, not harder." Lily nodded once, then pushed her worksheet toward him. "Then help me with Missouri." He bent over the paper with her, shoulder to shoulder under the warm yellow light, while his inbox waited open beside him like a door. When the phone vibrated again, It was not Victor this time, but an unknown number from downtown, and Ethan let it ring until voicemail took it. Morning came in hard lines of gray rain against the executive windows, and by 7:18 a.m. the board packet on Victoria Hale's desk had already grown damp at the corners from the coffee cup she had forgotten to move. Elevators opened and shut with brisk metallic sighs beyond her office wall while inside. The air smelled of printer toner, wool coats, and the bitter edge of a long night. Daniel stood in front of her desk with a laptop open, one sleeve wrinkled, his voice roughened from too little sleep. "We've isolated the main disruption points," he said, scrolling too fast. "If we hold Westmere at partial capacity for 48 hours and reroute through manual approvals." "No," Victoria cut in. "Show me what is fixed." He stopped scrolling. On his screen sat color-coded boxes, arrows, and a timeline that looked neat enough to impress someone who did not understand what it left out. "This is the path to stabilization," he said. "It is a presentation," she replied. "I asked for a working plan." He swallowed and glanced toward the rain-streaked glass, as if the city might lend him an answer. A knock came once. Mara entered with a folder tucked against her ribs and a tablet in her hand. "Westmere moved up the call," she said. "They're on line 2 now. Also, Denver and Columbus missed overnight allocation windows. We've got store-level stock imbalances spreading." She placed the tablet on the desk. 3 overnight managers had added comments in the operations channel, each shorter than the last, each edged with the kind of restraint that meant people were already deciding whether to stay or leave. Victoria did not sit. "Can manual approvals contain it?" she asked. Mara's eyes flicked once toward Daniel, then back. "Not at this scale," she said. "Not with the alert architecture disabled." Daniel bristled. "Then we re-enable it." "Do it," Victoria said. He touched the keyboard, hesitated, opened one menu, then another. The silence that followed was louder than argument. Rain tapped the glass. Somewhere down the hall, a copier started its grinding rhythm. Mara watched the screen without expression. Daniel's fingers paused above the keys. "It's not a straight rollback," he said at last. "Because?" Victoria asked. "Because some dependencies changed when I consolidated the logic." He said it carefully, as though choosing cleaner words might shrink the damage. "How many? I don't know yet." That answer seemed to remove the last bit of warmth from the room. Victoria took a breath through her nose, slow and controlled, then reached for her phone. "Westmere first," she said. On speaker, their COO did not bother with courtesies. The line carried the faint hiss of distance and the clipped rhythm of someone speaking while staring at losses. "We need confidence by noon," he said. "If you can't guarantee clean store planning and replenishment, we begin shifting volume." Victoria looked directly at Daniel while she answered. "You'll have my response before noon." When the call ended, she set the phone down with unusual care. "You have damaged a division I spent 6 years building," she said. Daniel opened his mouth. She raised one hand, and the words died there. "And you did it while disregarding warnings from people who knew more than you." He looked suddenly younger than 29, not by age, but by the collapse of borrowed authority. "I was trying to take control," he said. "You confused control with competence," she answered. Then she made the choice she had resisted all night. She tapped Ethan's number from the recent file HR had appended to his exit paperwork. The ringtone sounded small in the office, almost private against the weather and the machinery and the widening cost of pride. It rang once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Victoria lowered the phone, jaw set, and turned to Mara. "Get me every direct number you have for him," she said, "and clear my calendar until noon." That was the moment the balance shifted. The CEO who had once expected obedience was now reaching for the man she had dismissed, while across the city, unread in Ethan's inbox, Victor Shaw's offer still waited like a lifeboat with its engine already running. The restaurant windows held a pale noon glare, and the low hiss of an espresso machine drifted through the warm air, scented with coffee and toasted bread. Ceramic cups clicked against saucers somewhere behind the bar as Victoria Hale stood just inside the door in a charcoal coat that still carried the cold from outside. One hand closed around her phone like it had failed her personally. Ethan Mercer was already seated near the back, beside a window fogged at the edges, his sleeves rolled once at the forearm, a legal pad, and a pen untouched in front of him. He had not ordered lunch. He had ordered water. When Victoria approached, he rose out of habit more than deference. then sat again when she did, and the silence between them lasted long enough for the waitress to set down a second glass and leave. "Thank you for meeting me," Victoria said. Her voice was crisp, but the corners were frayed. "You said 15 minutes. Ethan gave one small nod. "You have 12 now." Outside, a bus exhaled at the curb. Inside, milk steamed, silverware chimed, and Victoria placed a folder on the table as if a document could still restore the old chain of command. "I'm prepared to bring you back," she said. "Senior Recovery Authority, direct reporting access, compensation adjustment, retention bonus, full discretion over the division's correction plan." Ethan looked at the folder but did not open it. The laminated menu at the edge of the table reflected a stripe of white light across his knuckles. "Under Daniel?" he asked. Victoria paused. "Formally, the reporting structure remains in place for now." Ethan leaned back. No anger, no performance. Just a slow breath, and the faint scrape of wood under the chair legs. Then nothing changed. Victoria's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," he said quietly. What wasn't fair was asking the person who built the load balancing rules, the reorder flags, the fulfillment thresholds, and the emergency routing to report to the man who turned them off because he thought the warnings made him look bad. The words landed without volume. That was the strange power of truth when it no longer needed permission. Victoria lowered her voice as a couple at the next table glanced over. "This is bigger than a personal grievance. It stopped being personal when your nephew started overruling people who understood the system and your staff got punished for being right." Ethan slid the folder back toward her with 2 fingers. "You still think this is about title placement and salary bands? It isn't. It's about whether competence matters in your building or bloodlines do." For the first time since she entered, Victoria looked away. Sun flashed off the passing traffic and moved across the water glass, trembling against the tabletop. "What would it take?" she asked. Ethan did not answer right away. He folded the paper napkin once, then set it aside. "It would take you saying out loud that the structure was wrong. It would take Daniel out of operational control. It would take authority that isn't borrowed from the same decision that caused the damage." Victoria's fingers tightened over the folder edge until the paper bowed. "You're asking me to humiliate my family in front of the board." "No," Ethan said. "I'm describing the cost of not humiliating your company." The espresso machine screamed again, then fell silent. Victoria stared at him across the table, and something hard in her expression shifted, not softened, not yet, but cracked enough to let daylight through. "If I do that," she said, "will you come back?" Ethan stood before answering. He placed a few bills beside his untouched water, enough to cover both drinks though neither had ordered more. "If you do that," he said, reaching for his coat, "then you won't need to ask what respect costs. You'll finally know." He walked past her and through the warm coffee smell into the sharp February air, while Victoria remained seated with the folder in front of her and a choice she could no longer rename as strategy. Cold white light washed the boardroom table until every water glass looked sharp enough to cut, and the vent above the screen pushed out dry air that carried the faint smell of burnt coffee and printer toner. A presentation remote clicked once in Daniel Hale's damp hand, then again, and nothing useful changed on the slide behind him except a red status column that seemed to spread by the minute. Victoria stood at the far end of the room instead of sitting, one palm flat on the lacquered table, while members of the board watched in a silence broken only by the hum of the projector and the distant thud of an elevator arriving somewhere down the hall. "Walk them through the Midwest recovery," she said. Daniel cleared his throat. "We've identified isolated execution gaps tied to legacy automation settings and overreactions from floor teams." Mara Benson, seated halfway down the table with a legal pad full of timestamps, did not even bother hiding the way her pen stopped. The chief financial officer looked up first. "Isolated," he said. "Westmere froze new volume 30 minutes ago." Another board member slid a phone across the table. On the screen, an email glowed under the boardroom lights. "Immediate pause on expansion orders pending operational confidence review." Daniel blinked at it, then looked at Victoria, but she did not rescue him. "Continue," she said. The room had changed since the restaurant. She had changed just enough to let consequence enter without an escort. Daniel swallowed and tapped to the next slide. A chart appeared, then stalled as if even the system disliked being handled by him. "We expect normalization within 48 hours. "Based on what?" asked the CFO. based on the team's adjustments. Mara's chair moved softly against the carpet. Which adjustments? She asked. Daniel turned toward her with the brittle impatience of a man whose borrowed authority had started slipping in public. The ones your team is already implementing. Mara folded her hands. My team has no authorization to re-enable the alert tree you disabled, restore threshold routing, or reverse the vendor blocks your office approved. The projector fan whirred louder. No one moved. Then the head of legal opened a folder and slid a printed summary toward Victoria. 3 clients have requested written assurance by end of day, he said. One is invoking performance review language. That was when the floor gave way under reputation, not under feet. Victoria took the summary, scanned it once, and set it down with precise care. Daniel, she said, did you disable Ethan Mercer's escalation controls after he left? He hesitated just long enough to ruin himself. They were excessive. That's not an answer. Yes, he said at last, voice thinning. I turned them off. They were causing noise. Mara let out a breath through her nose. The board members looked not at her, not at the screen, but at Victoria. The top division she had once used as proof of her judgment now stood under fluorescent light, stripped to the studs by one simple fact. It had been strong because the wrong man had been carrying it. Victoria straightened. Her heels made one hard sound against the floor. Effective immediately, she said. Daniel Hale is removed from day-to-day operational authority, pending board review. Daniel stared at her. Aunt Victoria, don't, she said. And this time there was no private family in the room, only corporate consequence. She turned to Mara. Document every overridden safeguard, every missed warning, every client exposure point by 3 p.m. Then to legal, prepare disclosure language. Then to the board. I made the reporting decision that led here. I will answer for it. No one rushed to comfort her. No one could. Outside the glass, the city shimmered in afternoon haze. Inside, the division that had once crowned her leadership was publicly falling apart, and as Daniel sank back into his chair with his untouched tablet dark in front of him, Victoria reached for her phone again, not to command now, but to call the only man who had already warned them what competence sounded like before they chose blood over backbone. Rain tapped softly against the apartment window, and the small kitchen glowed with the yellow warmth of an overhead bulb that buzzed just enough to be heard between the sounds of a spoon striking a ceramic bowl. Tomato soup steamed on the counter, carrying salt and basil into the room, while Lily Mercer sat cross-legged at the table in mismatched socks, sketching in the corner of her homework page as Ethan signed the last page of a printed offer packet. He capped the pen, straightened the stack, and slid it into a ridgeline envelope with a care that looked almost ceremonial. Lily looked up. So that's the new job? He nodded. That's the new job. She studied his face the way children do when they know not to ask every question out loud. Is it the better one? Ethan glanced toward the rain-blurred glass, then back to her half-finished drawing. It's the honest one. A knock came 3 minutes later, firm but not loud. Not the building super. Not a neighbor. Ethan crossed the worn rug, opened the door, and found Victoria Hale standing beneath the dim hallway light, rain darkening the shoulders of her coat. She had no assistant, no driver in sight, no folder this time. Just a phone in one hand, and the look of someone who had come without the armor she preferred. Ethan did not step aside at first. Daniel's out of operational control, she said before he could speak. Water glinted at the edge of her hairline. The board knows he disabled your safeguards. Westmere has suspended the rollout. I came to tell you myself. Behind him, Lily's chair scraped gently. Ethan shifted enough to block the view into the apartment without making a show of it. You told me what it would take, Victoria said. I did it. Ethan held the doorframe with one hand, feeling the chipped paint under his thumb. You did part of it. The hallway smelled faintly of wet wool and old carpet cleaner. Victoria let that answer sit where it belonged. Then hear the rest, she said. I was wrong. The words were plain. No corporate wrapping. No polished edges. I treated the person holding up my strongest division as if he were interchangeable. I chose family over competence and expected you to accept it because you needed the paycheck. I was wrong. In the kitchen, the soup simmered once and settled. Lily stayed quiet. Ethan looked at Victoria for a long second, then at the envelope on the table over her shoulder line, then back again. What happens now? She asked. Now. He opened the door a little wider, not to invite her in, but to let the answer breathe in a space where his daughter could hear what dignity sounded like when spoken softly. Now you fix what's yours without asking me to make your lesson painless. Victoria absorbed that without flinching. Are you declining? Ethan turned, walked back to the table, and picked up the Ridgeline envelope. The paper was thick, clean, and dry in his hand. He came back to the doorway and held it where she could see the logo. I already accepted this afternoon. For a moment the hallway went still except for rain ticking in the stairwell window. No argument came. No threat. Only the consequence of arriving after the bridge had already been crossed. Victoria exhaled once. Almost a laugh, but with no joy in it. Victor Shaw moved faster than I did. He moved with respect, Ethan said. That was the difference. She nodded slowly, the way people do when denial finally loses the room. Then I hope they know what they hired. Ethan glanced toward Lily, who was pretending very hard to keep drawing while listening to every word. They hired a man who goes home when he's told his worth depends on swallowing insult. Victoria lowered her eyes, then lifted them again, clearer now than when she had entered the hallway. The board will ask tomorrow how the division fell this far. Ethan's voice stayed even. Tell them it didn't fall in one day. It fell the moment the person doing the work was ordered to stand beneath the person borrowing the name. She gave one quiet nod, stepped back, and turned toward the stairwell instead of the elevator. Ethan closed the door gently, not abruptly, and the latch clicked with the soft finality of a chapter ending where it should. At headquarters, the top division would keep sinking under the weight of the choice that broke it. But in a small, warm kitchen across the city, a father set a signed offer beside his daughter's bowl of soup and proved that the job he walked away from was never the thing holding his future up.